So, good afternoon, students. So, welcome you all to another session. So, in the last class, we have started a few things with regards to the population, right? And we have seen a few things with regards to organisms and their response to the abiotic factors. We started off with a chapter called organism population. Under organism population, the first thing what we took up is different abiotic factors which are seen. So, we spoke about 4 abiotic factors: temperature, water, light, as well as the soil. So 4 abiotic factors we have discussed. Then we saw how the organisms usually respond to these abiotic factors, right? So under that we took up a few things with regards to regulators, the conformers, the process called as migration, suspension, all those things we have seen with how these organisms usually respond to those abiotic factors, right? And in the previous class we took up with something related to adaptations, right? So in order to survive, a particular organism undergoes different types of adaptations, right? So that they are able to cope up with the stresses put forth by these abiotic factors. So we saw almost a few examples in the previous class, right? So we said that all adaptations could be broadly classified into 3 categories. One is called morphological adaptation, second one is physiological adaptation, as well as behavioral adaptations, right? So we have taken up a few examples in the previous session to understand these morphological, physiological, as well as the behavioral adaptations as well, right? So with that, we have completed with the topic with regards to the organisms part. So how the organisms interact with that of its surrounding, or how living organisms usually, or living things or living beings interact with that of their surrounding. So that we have actually taken up in the previous session. So today's session, let us take up a few things with related to the second part of our chapter, which is called as population. Right. So let us take up with a few things with regards to population. So in this session, the first topic what we'll be taking up is with regards to something called as population attributes. So let's begin with the population attributes. Now, what do we mean by this term population attribute? So we have 2 terms here. One is population and the other one is with regards to something called as attribute. Now, what does these 2 terms mean? Let us first take up with population. Now, what do we mean by population? We know that population is nothing but a group of organisms, right, belonging to a specific species or belonging to the same species. That we usually call it as a population. So population is nothing but a group of organisms belonging to the same species, number 1. Number 2, they either share or they compete for the same resources, right? So what we are talking about, we are discussing about the term population. Population refers to a group of organisms belonging to the same species, number 2, who either share resources or they compete for a resources. Such group of organisms which belong to the same species and which share or compete for the resources, we start calling them as population. Right. Now, what do we mean by the term attribute? What do we mean by this term called as attribute? Attribute are certain characters or certain features or certain points which can be discussed only when we talk about population, but not about a single organism. So attributes are certain conditions or certain, we can take it as characters or features, which can be discussed only when we talk about a particular population. So whenever we are talking about an organism, we cannot have this attribute, right? So that particular character is not applicable when we talk about an organism. So if a particular character is applicable only when we talk about a population, or only when we take population into consideration, only then we start calling them as population attributes, right? So population is nothing but a group of organisms which belong to the same species who either compete or share for the same resources. First, population. Attributes are certain conditions or certain characters which can be discussed only in population and not in case of a single organism. That we start calling as population attribute. So let us take up a few population attributes, right, which is corresponding to certain population, right? So we have a few population attributes to be discussed. So let us take up with those population attributes. The first population attribute what we'll be taking up, right, the first population attribute what we'll be taking up is with regards to something called as the birth rate, and the death rate. So this is something what we can talk about only when we take population into consideration. So what do we mean by this birth rate, or what do we mean by the death rate? Talking about birth rate. Birth rate refers to the number of individuals born at a particular time period, right? So the number of individuals born at a particular time period in a given area, we start calling it as birth rate. So whenever we talk about population, we usually talk about birth rate. But whenever we talk about an organism, we usually refer to it as birth or death. Only in case of population, we use the term called as rate, birth rate or the death rate. So this is the first population attribute what we have. Right, one of the features which is restricted or which is set to be specialized only for a population and not for an organism. Birth rate and death rate. So what do we mean by birth rate? The number of individuals added to a particular population at a given time period is referred to as birth rate. Similarly, death rate also we can classify it the same way. We can define it the same way. The number of individuals dying in a particular population at a given time period, we start calling it as death rate. Let us take one simple example to study this birth rate as well as the death rate. Say suppose in a pond, right? Say suppose in a pond, say there are 20 frogs present, right? So in a pond, there are 20 ponds, 20 frogs present. After a period of 1 year, right? Say after a period of 1 year, through the process of reproduction, 8 frogs have been added to the population, right? So after a period of 1 year, 8 frogs have been added to the population because of the reproduction. Now, how do we identify the birth rate? How do we identify the birth rate of frogs in that particular pond? So to calculate the birth rate, what we do is number of new individuals added to the population will be 8 divided by the total number of individuals already existing in a population. So that is 20. So if we just start simplifying this, we get 0.4. So the birth rate of frogs in this particular pond in 1 year time is said to be 0.4. Right? So what does that mean? In 1 year, right? In 1 year, how many have been added? 8 frogs have been added. So if you have to define it with regards to the birth rate, it is number of individuals or number of new organisms that are added to the population at a specific period of time, we start calling it as birth rate. So the birth rate of frogs in this particular pond over a period of 1 year is said to be 0.4. Similarly, we can do it with the birth rate also. So say suppose there are 8 individuals, or say there are in a pond of 20 frogs, say 4 individuals have died in 1 year. If 4 frogs have died in 1 year, what would be the birth rate of it? So it would be 4 by 20. That would be 0.2. So the death rate here would be 0.2. So the birth rate as well as death rate. So the first population attribute what we have concerning any population is with regards to the birth rate as well as death rate. Right? So what do we mean by birth rate? The number of individuals born in a particular population at a particular time period, we call it as birth rate. Death rate, the number of individuals dying or the number of individuals who died in a particular population at a given time period, we start calling it as death rate. The first attribute. One more thing what you need to remember, birth rate and death rate is expressed as per capita. It is expressed in per capita. Right? So this is one more thing what you need to remember. We call it as per capita death or per capita birth, or birth per capita, birth per death, or death per capita. So this is the first population attribute what we have, which is called the birth rate as well as the death rate. Now taking up the second population attribute. The second population attribute, in some places birth rate and death rate, birth rate will be given as natality, death rate also will be given as mortality. Right? Okay. So the second population attribute what we have is called the sex ratio. Right? So this is another population attribute which is seen or which is confined to a population but not any particular organism. Right? So we call it as the sex ratio. Now what do we mean by sex ratio? The number of males to the number of females. The percentage of males as well as the percentage of females in that particular population would give us the sex ratio. Say suppose a population has 100 individuals, right? In that 60 are females and 40 are males. So talking about the sex ratio, we can say that 60% are females, whereas 40% are said to be males. So this would be the sex ratio, right? So the second population attribute what we have is with this ratio, which is called as the sex ratio, right? So the first attribute, birth rate and death rate. Second attribute would be with regards to the sex ratio, the number of females to the number of males, the ratio of females to that of the males in a particular population at a given time period. We start calling it as the sex ratio. So this is what we have in the second population attribute, which is called as the sex ratio. Moving on to the third population attribute. Third population attribute is something related to the age distribution. Age distribution. Now, what does this age distribution mean? In any population you take, any organisms you take, or any population you take, all the organisms that are present in that particular population have been broadly divided into three groups based on their age bracket, right? So, based on the age bracket, or based on the age distribution, or based on the age, we start distributing all the organisms present in a particular population into three major categories, right? So there are three age brackets. See, the first age bracket, we start calling them as pre-reproductive age, right? The first age bracket is said to be pre-reproductive age. The second one is referred to as the reproductive age. The second one is referred to as the reproductive age, and the third one is referred to as the post-reproductive age. Right. So all the organisms which are present in a particular population, right? Any organism you take, any population you take, again, all the organisms that are present in a particular population have been grouped or distributed into these three groups based on the age bracket. Right, we call them as pre-reproductive age group. Second one is post-reproductive age group, and the third one, reproductive age group, and the third one is post-reproductive age group. So any organism you take that is present in a population, it falls into one of these categories. And one more thing, what you need to remember, the age group or the age bracket varies from one population to the other population, right? So the age bracket, usually it varies from one population, it would vary from one population to the other population. So if you take the case of humans, pre-reproductive age will be all the individuals who are below 18 years of age. Whereas reproductive age, it would be from 18 to around 40 to 45, something around that, reproductive age. Post-reproductive age, all who are said to be above 45 years, especially in case of females, all the female individuals who have menopause, right? The menopause age is usually considered as post-reproductive age. So like this, in different organisms, it keeps varying, right? So it is not same, the age bracket is not same for all the organisms present in the population. It keeps varying depending on that particular organism. But again, whatever be the age bracket, based on their age, right, we start classifying all the organisms into these three major categories: organisms present in pre-reproductive age, the reproductive age, as well as the post-reproductive age. Right. Now, by analyzing these age brackets, or by analyzing the number of individuals that are present in each of these groups, we would get some sort of details about the status of that particular population, right? So by analyzing the number of organisms present in each of the group, first we would be able to plot something called as a pyramid, right? We usually call it as the age pyramid, right? So we get something called as the age pyramid. So how are we getting these age pyramids? By identifying all the individuals belonging to each of the category. So by identifying the organisms belonging to a number of organisms belonging to each of the category, we would get something called as age pyramids. So by analyzing these age pyramids, or by analyzing the shape of the age pyramids, we would be able to identify what would be the fate of that particular population. Getting it? Right? So by identifying how many individuals are present in each of these groups in a particular population, right? In a particular population, if we are able to identify how many individuals are present in each of the group, we will be able to plot something called as the age pyramids. So by observing the shape of the age pyramids, we will now be able to decide, or we will now able to identify or predict what would be the fate of that particular population. So what would be the destiny of that particular population, whether it would be a growing population, whether it would be a steady population or a stable population, or whether it would be a declining population. Right. By identifying the shape of that age pyramid, we will be able to identify. So let us take up with those age pyramids, and we'll see how we are able to identify what would be the fate of that particular population. So let's take up with the age pyramids. The first age pyramid what we have. So we are talking about the age pyramids. So under this, the first one. Say if under the age pyramids, the first one we are taking up here. Say if the number of pre-reproductive age group individuals are said to be more. Let us consider this to be the pre-reproductive age group individual, right? So this would be the pre-reproductive age group. So the number of pre-reproductive age group individuals is said to be more in a population, right? Then we would have here the reproductive age group, right? So reproductive age group is here. Then the next one, just consider this to be the post-reproductive age group, right? Now the shape of the pyramid here would be a triangular shape, right? Where the number of pre-reproductive age group individuals is said to be more, then the reproductive age group, and then the post-reproductive age group is said to be less. So what does this actually mean? The number of individuals, in case of humans if we take, the number of individuals who are below 18 years of age are said to be more. But the number of individuals who are more than 45 years, they are said to be less. So what would happen here is, whatever individuals are present in this group below 18, they would come to the next stage. As they come to the next stage, in the reproductive age, there would be more number of offsprings which are being formed. As a result of which, the more number of individuals would be added to a particular population. So if that is the case, if we find a age pyramid somewhat like this type of age pyramid, we start calling it as a growing population, right? So we can call it as a growing population. So we can identify the fate of this particular population. So by observing this age pyramid, right, which is said to be triangular in shape, we can say that this particular population is a growing population. So how we can say it is a growing population? Because the number of individuals who would be added to the population will be more. Why it will be more? Because the number of pre-reproductive age group individuals are said to be more. All of these group individuals will come to the second stage, which is the reproductive age, where they will start undergoing the process of reproduction, leading to the development of offspring, and all of those offsprings will be added to the population, as a result of which we start calling that particular population as a growing population. Right? So if we get an age pyramid, a triangular shaped age pyramid, we would start calling it as a growing population. So what examples can we take here for growing population? We can take the example of India. We can take the example of China. So India and China are nothing but growing populations whenever we talk about human population, right? So India and China can be taken as an example of growing population. The second type of population what we have. Let's take up with the second type of population. So in this type of population, say suppose let's draw the pyramid first and then we'll start naming it, right? So this is a population, pre-reproductive age group, right? So this would be pre-reproductive age group, right? And here the post-reproductive age group is the reproductive age group is almost the same, right? And then we would have the post-reproductive age group, right? So if we see here, the number of individuals present in all the three groups is more or less the same. Just say, suppose there are 1,000 individuals present in the pre-reproductive age group. So there are almost 1,000 individuals in a particular population who are below 18 years of age. Similar number of individuals are present in the reproductive age. Similar number of individuals are present even in the post-reproductive age also. So the number of individuals present in three groups, there is no much variation. almost all are said to be present towards the very closely. The number is said to be very close. If this is the condition, we start calling it as a bell-shaped curve or bell-shaped pyramid. If this is the condition where the pre-reproductive, reproductive, and post-reproductive organisms are present within the same number, then we would start calling such type of population as a steady population, right? We would start calling it as a steady population, or we would start calling it as a stable population, a steady population. So the example what we can give for steady population is, we can take the example of Austria, right? The country Austria. So in Austria, the type of population present in Austria is said to be a steady population. The third type of population we have, there is one more condition here. In the third type of population, what happens is, okay, let's take up the population pyramid first, then we'll see that. So if this is the pre-reproductive age group, right? So this is the pre-reproductive age group, right? Then we have the reproductive age group coming up here. So this would be the reproductive age group, right? And then here we would have the post-reproductive age group. So this would be post-reproductive age group. So if this is the condition, right? If this is the condition, then such type of things, if such type of distribution or such type of pyramid, what do we call? Pre-reproductive is less. So what does that mean? The number of individuals who are yet to reach the reproductive stage is less. But the number of individuals who are dying, that is post-reproductive age group individuals, everyone who are more than 45 years, their number is more. So what would happen? Since their number is more, they would usually die. And because of their death rate, since the death rate will be more here, this type of population, we would start calling it as a declining population. Right? So we would start calling it as a declining population, where very soon the number of organisms belonging to that particular population, right? The number of organisms belonging to that particular population will be less. We start calling it as declining population. So this type of curve pyramid, we start calling it as urn-shaped pyramid. URN, urn-shaped pyramid. So if we get an urn-shaped pyramid, when we start plotting this population pyramid, or what we call it as the age pyramid, if we get such type of pyramid, then we start calling it as a declining population. So what example can we give here for declining population? We can take the example of Japan. So Japan falls under this category called as the declining population, Japan. And along with that, we have some other countries also, such as Finland, Denmark, right, Sweden. So all of them, the type of population there is said to be a declining population. Right. So what the governments are actually doing here in this cases, they are actually promoting the birth of children. Right. So usually in our countries, India and China, what happens? They are telling that to restrict the number of children. But here there is no restriction for the number of children. In fact, the government in these countries are giving some sort of incentives for the second child, for the third child, for the fourth child. Right? So that's what is happening here in this countries, right? So based on the shape of this age pyramid, we would start, right? So based on the age of the, or rather based on the age pyramid, shape of the age pyramid, we would be able to identify or predict what would be the fate of that particular population, whether it is a growing population, whether it is a steady population, or whether it is a declining population. Things what you need to remember here. In a growing population, pre-reproductive individuals are always said to be more compared to that of the reproductive and post-reproductive group. In case of steady population, all three groups, the number of individuals present in all three groups would be more or less the same. Whereas in the third group, declining population, the number of pre-reproductive group individuals is much less compared to that of reproductive as well as the post-reproductive age groups, right? So this is the third population attribute what we have, which we call it as the age distribution. So based on this age distribution, we would start classifying all the organisms into three groups. One is pre-reproductive individuals or pre-reproductive organisms. Second one is reproductive organisms, and the third one is post-reproductive organisms. So based on the age bracket, we would start classifying them into each of these categories. So when we start identifying the number of organisms belonging to each of this category, we would be able to plot something called as the age pyramids. So based on the age pyramid, we will be able to determine what would be the fate of that organism, whether it is a growing population, whether it is a steady population, or whether it is a declining population. Right? Again, remember, in case of growing population, pre-reproductive group individuals is more than the other two. Steady population, all three will have the almost similar number of individuals, whereas in case of declining population, the pre-reproductive group individuals is said to be much less than the post-reproductive group individual. And a few examples, right? So three population attributes we have seen so far. One is with regards to something called as the birth rate and the death rate. Second population attribute was with regards to the sex ratio, and the third population attribute with regards to the age distribution. Right. Now let's take up with the fourth population attribute. Right. So let's take up with the fourth population attribute. So the next thing what we'll be taking up, or the fourth population attribute what we'll be taking up, is with regards to something called as population density. The fourth one is with regards to population density. Right, the population density. Now, what do we mean by population density? What does this population density mean? Population density, in other terms, we can also call it as the population size. Population size or population density refers to the number of individuals or the number of organisms present in unit area. Right? So how we can define population density? It is number of organisms or the number of individuals in a particular population present per unit area. Right? Present in per unit area. In case of land, we usually take it as unit area. In case of aquatic ponds, we take it as unit volume. Right? So the number of individuals present in a particular place in a unit area, we start calling it as population density. So what does this mean? Usually, in case of humans, if we have to identify the population density, we take into consideration square kilometers. Number of individuals present in, say, 1 square kilometer. How many individuals are present in 1 square kilometer, or how many individuals are present in 100 square kilometers? Say, suppose in 100 square kilometers, right? 100 square kilometers, say there are 1,000 individuals. So at that point of time, second case, in 100 square kilometers, say there are 10,000 individuals. So if there are 10,000 individuals in 100 square kilometers, we say that the population density of that particular population is said to be high. It is more. Whereas if there are 1,000 individuals present in 100 square kilometers, we say that the population density is said to be low. So population density is nothing but the population size. So how do we define it? It is the number of individuals present in a particular population in unit area. So that unit area, it depends on different organisms, right? If you take in case of bacteria, since it is very small, we usually take a square centimeter or so, because we usually culture bacteria in a petri dish. So in petri dish, if you want to measure what would be the thing, we usually take it 1 square kilometers. How many organisms are present? Usually we don't count how many organisms are present. We usually take into consideration how many colonies are present per square kilometer, or sorry, per square centimeter. That's right. So based on different organism, this particular thing starts changing. Right? So what you need to remember, what we mean by population density or population size is nothing but the number of individuals present in unit area. This we start calling as population density. So population density is usually given by capital M. Right? So this is how we denote the population density. So population density is usually denoted by the letter capital M. So this is what we have as population density, which is the fourth population attribute. Right. So moving on to number 5. The next population attribute what we have is called as the population growth. Right. So next thing what we have is the population growth. So talking about population growth. So when we say population growth, we are talking about either increase in the population or decrease in the population. Right. So whenever we have to identify whether there is increase in the population or decrease in the population, or we can put it this way, before we go into that, We spoke about population density, the number of individuals that are present in a particular population in a given unit area. Now, things what you need to remember. This population density does not always remain constant. One important term here, right? Population density, you take any population or any organism, right? It does not always remain constant. There will be always some sort of fluctuations in the population density. What are the reasons for this sort of fluctuation? There are four important factors which influence the population density time and again. Four important factors which influence the population density. So let us see what are those four. Out of those four factors what we saw, two factors they bring about increase in the population. Two factors they bring about decrease in the population. So let us see what exactly is happening. So let us consider this to be the population here. Right, so this is, say this is the population density. So we are talking about this population density here, right? So this is the population density. Now there are two factors, right? There are two factors, right? So one we start calling it as mortality, sorry, natality. So what do we mean by natality? Natality, we can also talk about it as the birth rate. The number of individuals added to a population per thousand is nothing but natality. Number of individuals born per thousand would be termed as natality. Now, since the individual organisms are being born, so what would happen? They would start adding the individuals to the population. As a result of it, since they are adding the individuals to the population, so what would happen here? The population density will start increasing, right? So natality always brings about increase in the population density. So what do we mean by natality? It is nothing but number of individuals added to the population per thousand. We call it as natality. Now, because of natality, the population density will start increasing. The second one, what we have this side. The second one, what we have this side would be, right? This would be termed as mortality. So what we have is mortality. Mortality again refers to the number of individuals dying, right? The number of individuals dying in this population per thousand. We start calling it as mortality. So because of mortality, what is happening? There is decrease in the population. So through natality, the population density or the population size would increase. Through mortality, the population size would decrease. Right. So through birth rate or through natality, the number of individuals added to the population will increase, as a result of which the population density would increase. Whereas in case of mortality, the number of individuals eliminated from the population increases, as a result of which the population density will start decreasing. So these are two major factors, right? Two major factors which operate in a particular population such that the population density will always keep fluctuating. Two major factors involved in determining the population density. Natality will increase the population density, mortality will decrease the population density. The second one, the next things what we have, two more factors I told you, right? So the two more factors what we have is, will be here. Right. So we have something called as immigration. Right. So what do we mean by this term immigration? Immigration is nothing but moving into the population. Right. Say suppose a person from outside, from abroad comes to India. So what are we telling that? He is an immigrant to India. So from outer place he is coming to India. So once this person comes to India, what happens? The population of India will start increasing. Right. So due to immigration, again, the population density will start increasing. Right? The population density would start increasing because of immigration. The last factor what we have, is called as emigration. The last factor what we have is called as emigration. Now what do we mean by emigration? Emigration refers to moving out of the population. Say from India a person goes out somewhere. At that point of time, what's happening again? The population density will start decreasing. So again, emigration will start decreasing the population density. So any population you take, a population density does not always remain constant. The reason why the population density does not remain constant is four major factors, of which natality and immigration will start adding individuals to the population, as a result of which the population size would start increasing. Whereas mortality and emigration will start decreasing the population, because the individuals from this population are being eliminated because of mortality as well as emigration, right? So natality, mortality increases the population density, mortality and emigration will decrease the population density. Among these four also, the major factor that operates is only mortality as well as natality and mortality. These two will come into picture whenever a new population is being created. Right. So whenever a new habitat is present and whenever some organisms go into that particular population, at that point of time, these two play a major role. But apart from that, in nature, in general, it is mostly natality as well as mortality who has major role in determining the population density, whether the population is decreased or whether it is increased. When is it increased? Whenever there is natality, the population density increases, and through mortality, the population density will start decreasing. Right? So this is what we have in the population growth. Now, if we have to identify whether a population after a time period T has been increased or not. So we have an initial population, say in 2019, there was one particular population. Now we want to identify in 2020 whether the population has increased or decreased. So how do we do it? So how do we calculate it? There is one simple expression with which we can calculate it, where we have NT, right? NT, right? NT refers to population density after a time T, right? So in 2020, we are seeing what would be the population. So NT would be equal to N naught, that is initial population. If you want to calculate the population in case of 2020, so we are taking initial population into consideration. N naught is the initial concentration, initial population plus natality can be defined as B, right? Birth rate, per capita birth rate, plus immigration, I, minus mortality can be taken as death rate, my, plus emigration. Right. So with this, we can identify what would be the condition of the population, whether the population has been increased or whether the population has been decreased. Right. So this is what we have with the fifth population attribute, which is called as the population growth. Right. So five attributes we have seen so far pertaining to the population. Five population attributes. Number one, which was with regards to birth rate and death rate. Number two, with regards to the sex ratio. Number three, the age distribution. So based on the age distribution, we were able to come up with the age pyramids, because of which we were able to say whether a particular population is a growing population, steady population, or a declining population. The fourth one, what we put up as population density, number of individuals present in a particular population per unit area. And the fifth one is population growth. So population density always does not remain constant. There will be a lot of fluctuations every time. And those fluctuations is because of these four factors what we have taken up into consideration. Right? So this is what we have with population growth. Now moving on to the last population attribute we have, which is called as the growth models. Right? The last population attribute what we have, number 6, is with regards to the growth model. So number 6 what we have is growth models. So what exactly is this growth model? I'll just give you the basic information with this. The technical term as well as the equations will start taking up in the next session once we take up in detail about this. So what do we mean by growth models? We said that a population starts always keep fluctuating, right? We said that a population density, it does not remain constant. It always keeps fluctuating, and we saw what is the reason for that also. Right. So whenever we talk about growth of an organism, we usually talk about two different growth patterns. One, when all the resources are said to be unlimited. This type of growth pattern is usually seen only in case of laboratory organisms. In the laboratory, when we are cultivating certain microorganisms, when we are culturing, not cultivating, we use the term culturing. When we are culturing certain microorganisms, what we usually do, we start supplying all the resources that is required for the growth of that particular organism. As a result of which, what would happen? The first type of model, what would happen is, due to unlimited resources, since in the laboratory we are providing those organisms whatever they need for their growth, what would happen? Initially, the growth would be slow. It would be slow. But over a period of time, it would start increasing and it would go on like this. Right. Initially, it would be slow. The period of growth will be slow. But once they get used to it, the growth will be maximum. Right? It keeps on increasing, or it would keep on reproducing and it would keep on increasing. This is the first type of growth model what we have, which we call it as the J-shaped growth. Right? So we would start calling it as the J-shaped curve or J-shaped growth model. So in J-shaped growth model, what exactly is happening? We are providing everything that is required for the growth of the organism. Let me give you one simple example. Say suppose in the lab, we are culturing a bacteria. Say we have put the bacteria in a petri dish. We have inoculated the bacteria here, and it is put in a petri dish. We have provided the nutrient media that is required for its growth, and this organism will now get adapted to that particular condition where the growth will be very, very slow. Once these organisms have been adapted to that condition, what would happen? It would start utilizing all the nutrients, right? And it would start growing at a very higher pace, right? It would start growing at a higher pace. So that is what we mean by this. So the graph, if you see, it starts going up like this because there is a rapid growth of these organisms happening. Now, once the petri dish is full, what do we now do? We start transferring these organisms or this bacteria into another larger petri dish, providing more amounts of media. So what we are doing now? Now we are providing enough of food that is required for the growth of some more organisms, and we are providing them space also. Once even this also is full, we again now start transferring into a still larger tubes. Sometimes we put it in flasks also, so that there is more of space given to them. Right. So whenever we start providing more of nutrients, more of space for them, the growth will be, it keeps on growing without any breakage or without any disturbances in their growth. Why again there is no disturbance in their growth? Because the resources are said to be unlimited. And how we are able to give unlimited resources? Because we are culturing them in the laboratory conditions. We are providing enough of resources for their growth. This is one type of growth model what we have. This is usually seen in case of laboratory condition, and the type of growth pattern we start calling it as a J-shaped growth curve. Right? This is a J-shaped curve is usually seen, and this J-shaped curve is usually seen whenever the resources are said to be unlimited. But in nature, this is not the condition. Right? In nature, this does not happen. What happens in the nature? There are certain limited resources. All the resources in nature are said to be limited. There is no unlimited resources present in nature. Because of that limited resources, the growth will be somewhat like this. Initially, again, the growth will occur at a slower pace. Say, suppose a particular organism has gone to a new habitat. So for that organism to adapt in a new habitat, it usually takes some time. So the growth initially will be slower. But once it has got adapted to that condition, the growth will be in a geometric manner. Once it reaches one particular stage, once the resources are being limited, when we say resources, we are majorly talking about two resources. One is food, the second one is space. Once the food and space becomes limited, at that point of time, rather than going up, the curve will start moving somewhat like this. Right? It will start moving somewhat like this. So what exactly is happening? What does this part of the curve means? Since the resources are said to be limited here, the number of organisms dying will be equal to the number of organisms born. Right? So the number of organisms added to the population will almost be equal to the number of organisms which are to be eliminated from such sort of a population. So this we start calling it as S-shaped curve. Right? So we start calling it as S-shaped curve, or we can also call it as sigmoid curve. We also call it as the sigmoid curve. So this sigmoid curve is usually seen in nature. The type of growth curve seen in nature is this S-shaped curve or the sigmoid curve, whereas this J-shaped curve is usually seen only in the lab conditions. Right? So this is what we have, the brief introduction to the growth models what we have. So in nature, there are only two growth models operating. It is either the J-shaped curve or it is either this S-shaped curve or the sigmoid shaped curve. Things what you need to remember, J-shaped curve is usually seen only in case of laboratory condition where there are unlimited resources, because in nowhere in nature unlimited resources are seen. Right? Nowhere in nature unlimited resources are seen. Unlimited resources can be provided only in the laboratory condition. Whereas in nature, since the resources are said to be limited, what happens? Initially, the growth pace will be slow, but once they get used to it, there will be an exponential growth, or we call it as geometric increase. And then once the resources become limited, it would enter into a stationary phase, a state of steady growth, where the number of organisms born will almost be equal to the number of organisms dying. The number of birth rate will almost be equal to the death rate, as a result of which a steady growth pattern would be obtained. Right? So in nature, only two possible growth models, either the J-shaped curve or the S-shaped curve. Right? So in the next session, let us get into the technical details of the J-shaped curve as well as the S-shaped curve. Right? Thank you.